Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night to everyone, wherever you may be across our lovely world. Thanks so much for joining us live today for the one and only Serverless Office Hours. We are streaming on the AWS Twitch channel, so thank you for joining us. And if YouTube is your thing, we're on the AWS events channel via there. So I'm Julian Wood. I'm a developer advocate for Serverless here at AWS and a longtime friend of the show, even ex-colleague. Dave, welcome back to Serverless Office Hours. How are you?
Hello, yeah, great. Thank you, Julian. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, awesome to be back. Thanks for inviting me back. As we said, I used to be a regular here. Now I just pop back every so often. But I have to admit, I have missed the good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. I've not heard that in a while.
I remember, Dave, you hosted once, and you even used that as the open line, which I thought was awesome. So
yeah,
had to be done.
Yeah, it's good. I have to bring it back into my talks.
Excellent. Well, we are chatting like old friends because we are. But Dave, for people who don't know you, who is Dave Boyne? What are you doing, and how did you get to do what you're doing?
Good, cool. Yeah. I'm Dave Boyne. So I don't know what I do anymore, but I like to say I'm an advocate for event-driven architectures. And obviously I used to work with Julian Wood. Who is Dave in the chat. Used to work at AWS as a developer advocate with Julian and people like this, which is really, really cool. And then I've now left to do open source stuff full time. So I spent like last 20 years just working in enterprises, startups, the usual, let's build some software for a business and try and make some money, I guess. And went to do advocacy stuff, which is like teaching people and all that kind of stuff, which is good fun. And now take a step away from that and just do open source full time. Which is really fun.
Well, excellent. Cool. Thanks for the intro, Dave. Yeah, we're going to be talking about Dave's pet project turned revenue stream business, which is called EventCatalog. So we're certainly going to be getting into a lot of that as well. But yeah, please let us know where you're watching from. It's lovely to see. We do have Julio joining us from YouTube saying, I really missed the Serverless channel. Well, you don't need to miss it so much because you're on it at the moment. And as we've got our awesome producer, Jeff, who says, any questions, also put them into the chat. Daily push, link to EventCatalog. I will do that shortly once I've stopped rabbiting on. It is actually on YouTube in the show notes as well. So if you do have it over there. And Erie Edits, welcome back, watching from LA. Let us know where you're from. We love to see our global serverless community. Also, it is, reInvent time happening in 2 weeks' time, the big show in Las Vegas for AWS reInvent. So lots of announcements are coming out already. There's been some things like we're chatting to Dave before about being able to build event-driven rules, event-driven rules in a sort of visual interface. So that is going to be super cool. AWS producer Jeff has also put the EventCatalog.dev up from as well. And Jaspreet Work 65 is from Canada. So yeah, obviously there are loads of things I could tell you about all the things that are going to be coming out at reInvent, but I'm probably going to get into some trouble. You've already may have seen some of the runtime releases. There are some more in the bag. They're not sort of super secret. We do talk about how we're going to get them within 60 days of release. So Java 25 came out at the end of last week. So that is super cool. A couple of changes to the Java runtime and a really good blog post in conjunction with Lefteris, who wrote all about that. We also came out with Rust support, which is now sort of general availability. So some people have gone, I didn't realize it was generally available. The point is, because Rust is a compiled binary, just like Go or things like that, the actual sort of code inside that you put inside the runtime to be able to talk back to and from AWS was actually technically in a preview mode before then. Community has helped to put that together. So sort of AWS has taken that on and made that sort of more official. But ultimately it was a compiled binary, very little changes in that as well. With a compiled binary, it either works or doesn't work. It's a very simple API to be able to talk to. But it just gives you a little bit more confidence if you are using Rust. Some people are asking, it's generally available. When are you going to come out with a Rust runtime? Similar question to do with a Go runtime, for example. We did used to have a Go runtime. To be honest, that was a bit of sort of hacky shim between the way Lambda worked and Go worked, so no need for that. We've got what are called custom runtimes, but actually the better way to talk about them is OS-only runtimes, where we still patch the operating system, we do all of that, look after that, the scaling, all the kind of things, and you compile your Rust binary or your Go binary, add it into your Lambda function, zip artifact or container image, and you're done. So there's no benefit we would add because we wouldn't be updating Go or Rust or any of those binaries. So anyway, a bit of a tangent down the runtimes. There are going to be a few more coming out, and so hopefully some cool, interesting things that can help you build serverless applications on AWS. So as we've been talking about Event Catalog, Dave, what is Event Catalog, and why would people need to catalog their events?
Yes, good question. Event Catalog really is an open source project that allows you to document your event-driven architectures, really. It's a project that started about 3 years ago, just as a catalog of events. That's hence the name, Event Catalog, the ability to document them. But since then, it's kind of grown arms and legs, as you can imagine, in 3 years. Someone said, on the comments, like Backstage. Backstage is an interesting one. It tends to get mentioned quite a lot. Backstage is more of kind of developer portal and being able to build infrastructure and all sorts of things and things like this. It's very complementary with Backstage. It's actually a Backstage plugin with Event Catalog, but think of it as a documentation tool at the end of the day. Documentation tool that's like opinionated on domain-driven design, events, commands, queries, and we'll go into some of the details. But the whole idea, the problem it's just trying to solve is, especially with event architectures, it just becomes a mess, right? It becomes a mess when you start building this stuff at scale around ownership, around boundaries, around all sorts of things. It just tries to bring some clarity to the mess. And I've spent the last year on it full time since leaving Julian in his place of work. And there are a lot of companies out there with the same problems. And I'm just trying to solve that in a unified way with open source, which is good fun.
So, I mean, I know people who do adopt event-driven architectures love it when they get going with it, but there is a bit of a learning curve to understand, the decoupled nature of things, and different services talk to each other via message channels and all these kind of things. What is the leap that people sort of need to jump over? We're used to talking about RESTful APIs or, synchronous, be that asynchronous. People probably more synchronous, and people understand, you send something to an API, you get a response. The documentation is probably in an API spec. But you've got a sort of one-to-one mapping of something talking to something else. But I think in event-driven architectures, because things are decoupled, you've got, one thing talking to another, but lots of things talking to different things. Is that sort of the challenge? And if you would want to sell the benefit of event-driven architectures, compared to just a synchronous request response, how would people learn from you and what the benefits are?
Yeah, exactly. As you mentioned, like everyone, we've been building RESTful APIs, even to be honest, message-based stuff for many decades now. But the barrier to entry to event-driven architecture is lowering for things like EventBridge, SNS, SQS, and this kind of stuff. But you just mentioned like request response patterns, right? So one request and one response, it's one-to-one relationship. It's really easier to grasp. Whereas if you have event-driven architectures, you've got a spider web. So you've got like here's an event, and then this event can just go out across the threads. And to keep that context in your head and understanding what's going on in your architecture as it grows, and you have more consumers come and go, producers producing messages, and teams everywhere, and large organizations and enterprises have tens, hundreds of teams. This spider web can get complicated, and it's no longer just request response. It's this event triggers these 10 services, and listen to this event and trigger more events, and orchestration becomes a thing. And wow, it's Wild West at that point. So the value of Event Catalog really is just to grasp some control over that and add some governance and guardrails around that, so you can continue to scale your architecture and document it without some of the pain points. And the pain points are there. I've spoke to a lot of people around all this stuff. If you haven't discovered these pain points yet, I'd love to talk to you because they are there, and for sure, and it's just trying to solve that. I can probably show some stuff if you want to help people actually get a visual.
Yeah, let's have a look.
What it is. But here is like eventcatalog.dev. I have like some demos and things. So Julian, I can go through them or whatever we can do. We can do whatever you want.
As well, remember, send us your questions, your comments, if the particular things you want to, find out about what Event Catalog does, or the bigger theme of event-driven architectures. Comments to your friend.
Yeah. So So the way it works really is it's documentation tools. So here is the documentation you get out of the box. It's very visual tool, so you can visualize your architecture. But the whole idea, it takes a lot of like leaves and value from domain-driven design. So you can actually document your domains and your services, and then document your messages, be it commands, queries, and events, and like basically tell the story. And the whole idea really is that it's like, how can we use this information to visualize something that makes sense to people in your organization? And as I said, it originally started off as a tool that's like, here are some events, let's say from EventBridge, right? So this is your audience. Here are your EventBridge events, and here they are on a list. But as I said, this has gone far beyond that now. You can actually see who's producing and consuming these events and who owns the producers and consumers and all this kind of stuff. There's other stuff, we'll go into a bit of this, but you can actually generate a catalog from a source of truth. EventCatalog is like technology agnostic. Doesn't matter if you're using SNS, SQS, Kafka, MSK, Kubernetes, Lambda. It doesn't really matter because the patterns are the same. So we can take your open API specs, we can take your EventBridge schema registry and actually generate documentation off the back of it. The way I explain this to a lot of people is you think of it in two halves. Think of one half as your automated documentation, and the other half is your manual documentation. So the example here is like your schema in EventBridge is changing maybe all the time. Maybe it's changing once a month or whatever, but it's changing, and the source of truth lives over there in the schema registry. But your documentation around the schema. So if I told Julian I have an order placed schema and here is a JSON value, that's great, but there is also business purpose and value behind the event. And that's what EventCatalog allows you to document is that half along with the schema, and keep the schema in sync with the docs. So yeah, I'm just kind of reading the comments as I go to.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. So open telemetry to verify the route. And design is still true. Yeah, something I'm looking to do at some point. I'm very curious about having agents, or having not AI agents, but having agents like running a container. Can you then verify routes in the architecture and visualize them too? So possibly, yeah. At the moment, there's no way to verify it. I was chatting to someone yesterday. They're actually using code and using AI to verify their docs and actually generate their docs. So we're actually exploring some of this stuff at the moment. But the whole point really here is to capture the business context, capture the value, and have that baseline of documentation for your architecture. Because as I said, especially as you get into event-driven architectures, it becomes a mess pretty fast. So I can show the demo catalog, Julian. I will ramble, Julian, if you don't stop me. So,
well, yeah, and we're just Daily Push appreciating all the questions. Yeah. So how does this work with a group that wants a C3 model? I'm not aware of the C3 model. I know C4 model. So yeah.
Yeah. So I can talk about that. I think there's a C4 model there. So the C4 model, yeah, it has the containers and the code and everything else. EventCatalog, actually, there's an RFC open at the moment to support containers. I'm going to walk. C4 too. I'm going to walk through some examples of this. But the way it is you've got the domains, and you've got the services, and then you've got the messages. Soon there's an RFC open on GitHub where it's also going to introduce containers. So that basically allows you to model any type of relationship. So a container can send and receive messages and basically open the doors to all these patterns and primitives. But I'm going like deep into the thing here. But yeah, it will be possible soon. There's a GitHub issue open if you want to check that out. But here it is. This is demo.eventcatalog.dev. This is my demo. This is what people would host. They would host their own catalogs. EventCatalog is self-hosted. It's open source. You can use a lot of the features for free. And it's just, you install it, and it's all based on, and I'll show you in a second, it's all based on markdown files. So the whole idea really is, and it's all GitOps. So the whole idea really is you have a Git, a folder, you store it in Git, and you deploy it to an S3 bucket. You deploy it to a container. You deploy it to a GitHub pages. You deploy it any way you want. And then
so basically with the artifact it creates after you've got the automatic sucking in of things from schema and things like registries. You've got manually, I suppose, annotating your events and doing comments and understanding what it is. And I presume, adding the domain-driven design you mentioned, there's definitely going to be a manual process of, documenting your kind of events. And then what, you build the site, and then it's a statically hosted site that could be anywhere, S3 bucket, GitHub pages,
exactly.
anywhere. Okay.
Exactly, yeah. And the caveat to most documentation tools, right, is the docs are out of date. And so what people are doing too is EventCatalog allows you to set up some Git workflows. So I'll give an example, right? An EventBridge, let's say an EventBridge schema changed. EventBridge has P1 events. I think they're called P1 events, if I remember. So you can actually listen to when schemas are changing in the registry in Amazon AWS itself. So what some people are doing is listening to these things and redeploying their catalog. So you have all these external factors changing, and all they're doing is redeploying. So some companies are deploying catalogs 100, 200 times a day because things are changing. So it takes a snapshot of the source of truth and then displays it. And that way you can actually create as many workflows and patterns that you want in your system. So there are runtime capabilities that can get schemas at runtime. It can do stuff, but they're just features you have to dive into. You can host this as a server, but I won't go into all of that because I know it's a lot to take in. But here it is. This is the catalog. Here are the domains. Here are some visualizations and things like that. You click on the architecture documentation and you're presented with your documentation, funny enough. On the left here, we have the domains. If you want domains, if you want services, we have flows and all sorts of things. Everything is optional, but here is like the product domain, right? The product catalog. Here is what it is and what it does. Here are the messages inside of this domain. And the whole idea really, as I said, is just being able to say, here is my container, right? Here's my, maybe I have a domain full of Lambda functions, or I have a service full of Lambda functions. I don't know. But here it is, and like here is it modeled, and here are like the events coming in, and here are the events coming out over particular channels. So in your case, if you're on AWS, you'd have your inventory service, which would be like, let's say it's a container, a Express app, or Python, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's accepting these types of messages. So we have the event that comes in, and then we also have a query. Maybe it's an API. We have queries and commands. And we can just visually represent this. And then basically the whole idea really is just to give developers an understanding of what this thing is, how can I use it, how can I get started, how can I visualize it, who owns it, what part of the domain does it belong to, what databases is it writing to, previous versions of this thing, whereabouts is the repository, view in the visualizer, so I can actually simulate some of the messages and see where they're going to and where they're coming from. So it's just basically taking your information, as I said, and trying to make that discoverable for people. And that's really going back to that discoverability point. It's like, hey, we have this architecture. We know it's in 12, 13 different AWS accounts or whatever, and different domains and different things because we're following best practices. But to get a grasp on that as a developer or a product owner or an architect is actually quite hard. Especially, a lot of people I speak to at the moment have like duplicated effort with events, right? So one team is publishing an event and the other team over in the other place is publishing the same similar event, but they don't know and there's duplicated effort. They don't know because they don't know what events they have, because it's just a free for all, right? Especially I call it like the AWS SDK magic, right? Whereas to be event driven, it's like an SDK call on EventBridge, and it's like, and now are you event driven? Sure, we have some targets and rules, but there's much more to it than that. There's much more design to it than that, and domain stuff and documentation. There's just a lot of value to be had, and it's just trying to capture some of that value for people and presenting documentation in a way that's useful. Now, most people out there are probably familiar with Open API documentation. I'm going to see if I should have an example here somewhere. Oh, sorry, it's in this one. So I think Julian mentioned earlier about Open API. Sorry, let me just. Cool. So like here we got the order service, right? And the order service is an API. Now, most people, familiar with this kind of look and feel for a Swagger spec API documentation tool. The way I think about event-driven architectures and stuff is it's like 15 years behind API documentation tools and things like this. So why can't we just bring it up into the 21st century, really? And that's all we're saying here is we have these things, and these things are sending messages. These messages tend to belong to this. We have databases and things like that. So it's a way to really just model your architecture as docs as code into a tool, really. And there are other things, but as I said, I can kind of ramble on or keep going, or
Yeah, I just want to sort of circle back to the actually creating the catalog and updating it, because obviously I think something like an API spec or a schema seems logical that that's something you could import into this catalog. But some other sources, how much sort of manual effort is required? How much? How should companies think about deploying this? Starting from scratch, importing the stuff they have, even figuring out what they've got. Even before they're documenting to understand what's going on. What are the sort of steps you see people use?
Yeah, there's a few, right? And it really depends on what kind of background you're coming from. But a lot of people do like big, like event storming, right? On a big picture event storm, like what do we have right now today? Let's event storm this out, and let's like make a visualization and post-it notes and things like that for people that don't know this. But what we're trying to do is collaborate and actually understand the system. And once you understand the system and take a part of that system, start to document some of that system into things like EventCatalog. I actually have an MCP server, which I'll show you an example of in a second. But you can actually take an event storming picture and actually use AI to translate it into an EventCatalog, which is pretty fun. But that's kind of it. And the way you kind of start with EventCatalog is, there's a lot here, but just start with one service, start with one event. And it's like, okay, well, here's the event, here it does this, whatever else. As you mentioned, there is a bunch of integrations. So if you look on here on the website, that you can pull schemas from and keep them in sync. So EventBridge is one of them. And the way this works is it takes your EventBridge schemas and puts it into EventCatalog, so you can actually keep your schemas in sync with your documentation.
So that's from the schema registry, basically pulling schemas that you've already published into the
correct
schema registry. Okay.
Yeah, and to show you an example of that, I have a schema registry here. Here are a load of events that I have. So imagine your teams in your organization are just like publishing onto the event bus, and you have discovery on and things are happening. Hopefully you're following some convention around your source type and your detail types, and so things are logical. And then what you can do, I'll just show you an example here. I have an event catalog. So the event catalog, when you create one, you would just basically get some files out the box. Like we have teams and users and other things. But the event catalog config file is the one that kind of where the magic happens. And all I'm doing here down here, ignore most of this, just configuration. We're using the EventBridge generator. And I'm saying, okay, here we can say, go to region US East 1. Here's a registry name, which we just saw. And what I'm going to do is map these into the service. So I'm saying that the order service is sending these types of messages and receiving these types of messages, right? And it uses similar actually filtering capabilities that EventBridge does itself. So we have like source and detail type, we have prefix and suffix filtering. But you can say like here, what I'm saying is that this service is sending all of the events that have the source type of demo orders, and it receives the inventory updated event. And then when you run this, I'll just run this now on my other computer. But when you run the command, the generate command, what it will do is it will start putting these into the right locations in EventCatalog and actually generate the catalog for you. So as you can see here, the domains folder is just started. I have the services have the events. We have the events here. We have the schemas that are being pulled in. And then we also have the markdown files, right? So all this is generated for you using your schema registry. We haven't actually documented anything here. We're just saying, here is like some events, and here is how they map to my logical conceptualized architecture, right? And then what happens here is when I run this, so this is all generated now. We have the events, we have the services, and we have the domains and all this kind of stuff. And then what I'll do is run this. So I'm running this here. So I have this is all from nothing. So we have the documentation. So if I go over here, we can start to see that the events, this service is sending these type of events. If I go to the event itself, I can open the schema registry in the AWS console. I can see this. I can go down and see the schema itself. So we have this like cool schema viewer where you can actually search for properties on the schema. And then we can actually see the schema like this. We can download the schema, view it in the visualizer, add change logs to the schema, all sorts of weird and wonderful things. So yeah, going back to your question, it's you can, to get the value out of event catalog, where to start. Personally, I start manually, just pick something, document it, and then when you get more and more value from it, just start automating it. And we also have the SDK. So you can have a source of truth anywhere. You can have a source of truth in a third-party tool, any third-party tool. If you've got events that are on your machine, if you've got events in Confluent or wherever, I don't know, you can actually write some generators and write your own custom plugins to fetch the information and keep them in sync with your catalog. So it really depends on how much you want to automate versus manual. And again, step one is just test the value and see if your team get value from it if you have the problem of documentation.
Excellent. So yeah, so I mean, from what I'm seeing over there, it's got cool, versioning capabilities. I can see that being an issue, that as events and things change and evolve, you've got to find out who's using the old and new events and see when you can do kind of migrations. Yeah, the searching and filtering looked pretty cool. Yeah, I see you bringing up the the Schema Explorer. So is this just then another view that can look at all the schemas that it happens to have pulled in from various places and understand what you've got?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So if you think of your architecture, think if you've got schemas from OpenAPI, GraphQL, EventBridge, Kafka, anywhere, right? And the Schema Explorer really is just a way to filter and search these things. But it does a bit more than that. So here is my catalog. So you can run this on the demo site. And we have the Schema Explorers here, and we can just click on these schemas and start to explore them, funny enough. And I can see the schemas, but also I can kind of see a few things. So delivery failed, we can see has free versions. Now, if you have free versions of your event in EventBridge, it'll pull in the versions. But versions evolve, right? And schemas change. Most schema registries keep schemas versioned, and we pull and sync them in, but you can actually do this manually in Event Catalog. It doesn't really matter. But here, we have delivery failed. We have the delivery failed different versions, 1.0. We are viewing the 1.0. We can go to the schema thing here, so we can actually search for properties on the schema. Now imagine if your schema is huge. Some people have monstrous schemas, so you can actually quickly filter by properties. But we also have a few other things that are useful. So we can actually see who owns the schemas from this view. So we know that I own this schema. So one problem that some people have with event architectures is like if you want to make a change to an event or you want to ask questions, I don't know, like who owns the events, who owns this information? No one knows half the time. So having ownership is really useful. But also the producers and consumers. Now this schema only has one producer. By the looks of it, it has no consumers, right? So in theory, in this case, we can make changes to the schema without breaking any downstream consumers because no one's consuming the thing. So there's that to consider. And then there's API access. So you can actually like make a GET request to get the schema here. So if I do this over here, you can see I just downloaded the schema there. But you can, for whatever reason that you might want to fetch a schema, integration tests, verification, whatever it is else like that.
Even bindings in your IDE, you're coding and you just want your schema in your IDE.
Exactly, yeah. And I'll come to that in a second because there's pretty cool things. You can do that with the MCP stuff. But here is like even the diffs, right? What has changed between the versions of your schema, and just being able to actually quickly see that is quite useful. So I can do a full screen mode here, and we can actually see that this schema has evolved and things have been added and things have been removed. Again, these are things that aren't often captured when schemas evolve. So being able to just see what has changed possibly, can be useful in this kind of use case. And that's just JSON schemas. There are protobuf schemas. Yeah. There are Avro schemas. So again, some Avro stuff here, as you can see. Open API schemas, async API schemas, GraphQL schemas, any kind of schema, right? It's just like this. The Schema Explorer is new to EventCatalog, recently new, but it basically gives the people the ability just to say, okay, I need to quickly find like a schema. I'm looking for, a particular Avro schema in our architecture, whatever. And it's just like, okay, well, here is just a different view of the data. The data is in EventCatalog. It's just a different way to represent that and visualize that for people. So yeah, that's a Schema Explorer, which seems to be going down pretty well with some of the people using EventCatalog.
Cool. So yeah, Schema Explorer looks awesome, but you did mention some of the integrations with EventBridge and other kind of things. Are the integrations sort of those? Are those the kind of plugins where you can then connect to Kafka or Confluent or EventBridge or any other kind of systems to be able to grab those? And are those then connections to different schema registries, but then also I suppose connections out just to files if you have an open API spec or something like that that's sitting in a file share somewhere, or are they different kind of things?
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's integration. So Open API, here's the Open API integration. So if you've got Open API files like on GitHub or on wherever else or on file systems or wherever, you just reference the Open API file and it will just kind of render this and pull all of these and document them. But it's the same, AWS. And I
suppose you can also square the circle, do whatever, where lots of API tools allow you to export an Open API schema or some kind of schema for that. And, a lot of people aren't doing that because they don't necessarily see the value in that. But, I know for API Gateway, you can connect to it, be able to export your schema, and then you've got it available, which will be super useful. And probably people aren't thinking they need to do that from a documentation kind of perspective. But yeah, this seems an easy way that you could, even automate that.
Exactly that, yeah, exactly that. We have the Open API integrations. So I wrote an Amazon API Gateway plugin because, as you said, you can just export the API Gateway to an Open API and then use the Open API thing to do that.
Okay, so here you don't even have to do the export yourself. You can just
link it to your API, and then it will just kind of pull it in as and when you want. It also managed the versions for you. So if like your versions and your schemas are changing in EventBridge, it'll pull these and version the schemas in EventCatalog for you. So it'll always keep the versioning in sync. But exactly that. It's like the source of truth. What is the source of truth? Some people have EventCatalog as a source of truth. Other people have like ABC as the source of truth, and EventCatalog just as representation of that. So it really depends, on what people want to do.
And did you have AWS Glue as an integration?
That's right. Registry? Yeah. So AWS Glue, yeah.
Because think about it, people are thinking, event-driven architecture is AWS Glue. But the recent update we've had with Lambda using Kafka is if you are using protobuf and you are using Avro, you do need to use a schema. That's there are binary formats, and you need to be able to encode your message using a schema, and then decode your message using a schema. So that those schemas can obviously be stored in files or this kind of thing. But obviously, using a central repository like a Glue schema registry is great. And so there actually has been a recent a release with our Kafka event source mappings, where that can automatically integrate using the provision mode, integrate with Glue schema registry to be able to decode those protobuf and Avro messages, and off you go. You've got fully schema compliant producers and consumers, and it all just plugs in and works. So good to see that you can grab those schemas in here as well.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah. It's just anything that can be integrated. When we're doing Apicuro soon, Apicuro is a open source schema registry, but it's the same thing. If it's got an API that you can integrate with, it's like, yeah, sure. And as I said earlier, if we don't, tell us on Discord, and happy to support something, or just equally as an SDK, like you can build yourself. So
Okay, excellent. So, yeah, extendable. Yeah, you have mentioned throwing out MCP for a while. MCP sounds great. Asking questions of your event catalog. Yeah, can you show us how does that work?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so there's two ways in which you can use AI with Event Catalog. Now, it's quite a funny thing because I mentioned AI to some users of Event Catalog or customers. And it's quite an interesting one because you got half the customers that are like, love it, and that, this is great, and then you have half customers who just don't touch AI and they don't want to hear it. So there's a pre-warning for anyone that's about to get triggered because AI, we're about to talk about AI. So there's two ways really. One is the first way, which before MCP was out, I created like this chat system in Event Catalog. So the way this works is like you bring your own model, so like OpenAI model, Google model, Anthropic model, doesn't really matter. And then you can start talking to your catalog. So you just say, what events do we have? And it will go basically and query the catalog using some of the tools actually, and return some of these answers for you, right? So when I started playing around with this, I thought, wow, this is pretty powerful actually, being able to actually, if you think of the way I think about it, if you think of Event Catalog as the knowledge base for your business, like in terms of your domains, your context, your bounded context, your messages, your APIs, and all this kind of stuff, like, and the owners and things like that. If I can query an event catalog and architects using natural language, I think that's pretty powerful. But you can ask like anything, like,
because that's the kind of question you're going to ask in your head anyway. You're going to say, who is consuming? Tell me all the services that consume the customer events, for example. I mean, that's what you think in your head, and then you've got to search through the catalog to find the customer events and see who's producing them and see who's consuming them. May as well just write the question in English.
Exactly. So like exactly that. So I've just like, give me the schema for this event, and it's like, yeah, sure. Here's the schema, Avro schema. Now I can say who's consuming it, right? And let's see what happens, see if anyone is consuming it. So this is kind of like event catalog chat in terms of, here we go, not listed in the documentation. Okay, so it's basically saying I don't think it can find it or it doesn't have any, but here are some people in the catalog that you need to go speak to. So these are actually people in the catalog. So
when you configure models, are you just giving an open API key or that kind of thing in the event catalog config? And
exactly, exactly that. And event catalog is self-deployed too. So there is no SaaS, there is no nothing. So all the data and everything is just owned by you. So you can put your key in there, you host it. In this case, it needs to run on a server because there is back and forth between keys. And you just host this in a container, and then it's just like good to go. So this is like event catalog chat. But then we had the MCP release last year, this year, I can't even remember. MCP crazy, and the world's gone MCP crazy. But some interesting things, right? So I'll show you an example now. So let's say I'm in Claude, right? So this is an MCP client. What events do we have in our architecture, right? So Claude I've set up Claude here to actually use my MCP server. So as you can see here, I'm going to go check find resources in event catalog. So it's called my tool, and my tool is then returning that these are the events for you and things like that, right? So without doing much, I've basically given the Claude desktop just access to loads of tools. Like, okay, here are the events, like what are the domains, give me the schemas, help me write some schemas. Would you like more information about an event? Sure. Tell me more about this, tell me more about this. And the way I think about this is like when you're especially like from a developer's point of view, it's now trying to find the resource. It's like, okay, I want to build this feature. Tell me in our architecture if we have events that are related to this feature, right? Do I have to do rework or not? Do we have anything in the architecture that can help me and assist me here? And when you have the source of truth, the documentation, it's like, well, yeah, sure, we have these events. So this is like just one example, but here is like, let's go to like a serverless demo, right? So I have a CDK project, hello world, and it's just like returning some stuff, some nonsense, right? And I can say, okay.
So this is in Cursor, by the way. I'm just checking. So just another MCP client.
Yeah. Jumped over to Cursor, and I'm like, okay, using event catalog. Tell me what events do we have, right? So again, the same question. I'm not very creative on these questions. But it'll go to the tool, find the resources, sure, why not? And look at that's rapid, right? It's like, okay, here is some of your information. It's quite scary, to be honest, how fast this is. And it's like, okay, here is some stuff, planning next moves, whatever. But what I'm going to do is then I'm going to tell, okay, here we go. So inventory adjusted, let's just take that. Create me a Lambda function using the inventory adjusted schema, create the types for the schema. For now, return hello world. I don't know, some nonsense. But hopefully, let's see what it does. So it's trying to fetch the schema using the tool. It's reading what we already have. I have no idea. I've not even tested this. And it's what is it doing? Let's have a look. So we've got Lambda listed here, creating some types, inventory adjusted, right? So the inventory adjusted thing somewhere, cool. And this is all looks familiar. This is all from the schema that we've just done. We've got the hello TS file that's now using it. And it's just basically, as I said, it's using Event Catalog as this knowledge base of your business, especially with domains and bounded context and all sorts of things. I won't bother running that. Probably a domain. Sure, why not? So that's it. And to get the MCP server up and running, it's just the MCP server is open source. You can kind of check that out. If we're missing tools and things, it has a bunch of tools to be able to do query, schema fetching or domain fetching or any of this other stuff. So some user yesterday was actually saying about adding the SDK onto the schema, onto the MCP server. So the MCP server can now actually create you an event catalog from your code, right? And actually say, okay, here is my code, like across GitHub or across this repo or whatever. Like analyze it and then try and document it using event catalog. So I'm curious to see where that kind of stuff goes. But even having event catalog information, accessible to your organization as you explore and try and build things, I think is super valuable. I don't know what the other solutions are these days to be able to do that. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's a different way to think about it. Because I've used it, in an IDE where you connect directly to your sort of schema registry, and then you pull down your schema, and it can, for type ahead and type safe and TypeScript and those kind of things can be really useful. But you sort of got to know what you're doing, and you've got to import it, and it's downloads as a file, and I don't know. I always found that it's useful but a little bit clunky. But yeah, just to be able to say, use a schema, it's going to download it, write the code for you, and do it all in one step is that's no, I love it.
I'm just curious to see where that goes really. There's a lot of changing in the AI world, as you know, and it's just trying to keep up to date with all of that. But
so in terms of how that runs behind the scenes, obviously that can't be a static site then. Does that then Event Catalog then needs to run somewhere, server or container or something, so it can then host the MCP server as behind a URL or that kind of thing, or is it actually a locally running MCP server?
That's correct. Yeah, there's a couple of things there. The tools actually use the docs. Let's have a look. So there's this pattern at the moment that some documentation people actually use, which is called LLMs.text and LLMs full text and all sorts of things. So exactly that, the MCP server actually needs to point to your hosted catalog, and then what it does is it will then use these endpoints, these markdown endpoints, to actually fetch the information it needs. And that's pretty much as it works. The way I think about it is you have a table, you have a book, and it has a table of contents at the front and an index, and then it has the pages, of where you want to go. And that's exactly what this is doing. It comes into the front page, says, okay, I kind of need to know more about this. You've asked for the schema, whatever else. One thing that I haven't seen anyone else do, which I added, which I thought was pretty fun, which is actually the schemas.txt file. So these are all the schemas in your catalog. So what will happen here is the MCP server will say, okay, you're asking me for a schema. I know these are your schemas. And of course, I'm going to try and match your request against these schemas and give you the right one. So on these URLs here, the access to all the schemas. So it's not actually an MCP server can actually be hosted right as a server with an MCP endpoint and all this kind of stuff, but it's not that at all. It's kind of more of a standard out MCP server where it's just like, okay, it runs on your computer and goes and fetches the stuff and tries to work out the value there really.
Well, so that's an interesting approach. So you do have an MCP server that's basically downloaded and running locally, but that is actually, I don't want to say it's not doing anything clever, but it's actually connecting to static files that the event catalog has generated, but in a format that an LLM can use. So even though you have lots of different formats for lots of different files that are storing all your different events, here you've got some sort of aggregated text files that have been created, stored on the server, and the model can just grab that and then put it into the context window and say, here are all my schemas, find out the ones that you've asked for about the inventory adjusted. So actually, that's a I can think of a lot of use cases for that approach where it is just static data, but it's just in a format that's friendly, and obviously multiple iterations. So you're looking at the schema, you've then got the URL. It can prettify the response and then knows, if I need to connect to that URL, be able to a clickable link to go directly to that URL. You're not using MCP.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a few improvements to make. Someone mentioned about like paginated resources. I didn't know that was a thing in MCP, but some people have like hundreds of schemas and stuff. So there are things to do there. But I like that idea. I think it's very simplistic in terms of here's the book, here's the table of contents, and it's like here are the page numbers, and it's like if you need to go know more, just go read the page or go look at the page and kind of come back. But it kind of gets me thinking about other patterns and things. Like I try and think of other catalogs. I guess I don't want to overextend at all. But like organizations have like shared rule files or like best practices. Let's say Lambda, right? And we want Lambda best practices. We do this, we do that. And I'll think about these rule files and these things across your organization. It's like, where are these things? I don't know. I'm curious what people are doing. I have no idea. But I like the concept of this. Whereas if you had a catalog of rules or something like that, could you not do the same thing? Whereas like, here is a table of contents with some of the rules that you've mentioned in your organization, and you want to create a new Rust Lambda function using the new runtime. Sure, but here are our best practices. And the LLM will know and fetch that's shared across the business. So I don't know, but yeah,
interesting. And I suppose you can have even multiple MCP servers doing different kind of things, because we have a serverless MCP server, which is going to help you for creating CDK code or deploying or locally testing or that kind of thing. But then you could use your event catalog or other MCP servers to connect to different parts of your organization. Maybe your event, you want to say create a Lambda function that is going to produce events to EventBridge for this service. I want the events to be called da-da-da. And all that can do, but that can also then, obviously look at the Lambda stuff, look at the MCP server for understanding best practices for a Lambda function, maybe AWS documentation for formatting the SDK request to EventBridge, but then also saying, well, what is your naming convention for your schemas? What version do you already have, so you can have the next version? And even maybe having some self-documenting stuff in the schema name, or I don't know, that kind of thing that you could get actually quite clever with actually, from scratch, just from a natural language prompt, be able to generate a schema that's got sort of its own documentation about what it is, what it does, which will be helpful to import.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm just really curious about these patterns. Like one thing I've advocated for before and seen other people do before is like the idea of manifest files, which is like an event-driven architecture manifest, right? It's like, okay, well, our naming conventions are always like this. We always use Kafka. We're always using this, and this, and just these they are literally rules, but to have that as the core and have that accessible to people as they're building stuff, I think you can really start to maybe not totally enforce, but help with best practices in the organization.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So no, I mean, I've been playing a lot actually with Kira, which is our Amazon's sort of AI coding assistant. You saw Dave with Cursor there. The cool thing about lots of these is they're all actually VS Code clones. So a lot of the plugins, a lot of the things all work with them as well. And Cursor became GA this week. And its cool thing has got the sort of spec-driven development where you actually write out what you want. And then it's a sort of iterative approach where instead of just, YOLO going from vibe coding from do this and off it goes and creates the end artifact, it's got a sort of particular stage process of where it creates, generates the requirements. You then look at the requirements and you say, oh, yes, that's right. No, that's right. Oh, I didn't think about about that, let me amend that. It then creates a design. Again, you look at it and reiterate and go, oh, that's not what I thought, or actually the design should be part of that or not part of that. And then ultimately it creates tasks, and then it only eventually goes and creates your code. But if you think of that kind of process, manifest files or your coding samples or that kind of thing is a brilliant thing to bring on early in that kind of process, where I'm using TypeScript. I want to enforce types. I want to use test-driven development. If I'm using Python, ensure I'm using whatever web framework you want to use. Or if I'm using Java, Spring AI is the kind of thing I want to be doing. And all the stuff that's in your brain and in your documentation and the way you train your developers, you write that up, stick it in some files. And you're talking about and make that available to your coding assistants is super useful. A spec will take you even further. And you're just having a way to make that more discoverable and easy to get to. Sounds helpful.
Yeah, for sure. To me, it does sound helpful. Again, if anyone's watching this and doing any of that, I'm curious, to see what people are up to in that space. Yeah,
no, definitely. I mean, if you're watching live, or also you're watching the recording, let Dave know this is an interesting space. And I just slight tangent though. I mentioned reInvent is coming up. I'm doing some reInvent presentations, and I've actually been using Curo to help create them in the spectrum of development way. So, all year I sort of have an idea of what I'm going to be talking about, and I'm gathering information and tips and tricks and blog posts and code samples and trawling even internal AWS documentation on how our developers build serverless applications. So I'm gathering. And then, what I've done is I've, incorporated that all in a whole bunch of different folders and, whole bunch of web links and all kind of things. And then I said to Kira, I'm building a best practices for serverless developers. It's a 400 level. I could even read the prompt out if I could find it. But I'm doing a best practice. This is my source material. This is it. Include this, exclude that, and everything. And so off it went, and use Spectrum development, and off it went and built all the requirements. And I could go through the list, and and then I even said, suggest a narrative or a story that could tie this all together. Or what chapter headings would you suggest? And it came up, and some of them were weird and wonderful and absolutely wrong. But it wasn't right at the end thing where I had to go, change that, and it has to go all back at the beginning. With this iterative approach, I could look at the requirements, I could look at the design and the tasks, and it did super well. The thing it did fail on, I will say, is I spent a vast amount of time just saying, okay, can you do a lot of this in PowerPoint? And I spent forever, and it just wasn't good enough for my nitpickety PowerPoint skills. So in terms of the content curation and the grabbing information from a whole different places, that is super good. Which sounds very familiar to when you're building event-driven architectures. What do? You're grabbing a lot of information from a lot of different places, distilling it, tying it together, and using the documentation.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, hopefully your presentation goes well. It might be a 5 out of 5 CSAT score or a 2 out of 5. So we
will see. See, we have a few minutes. Do you have anything else you want to show or demo? I do have some other things to pick your brains in. You're the guru.
Really, as I said, I can talk hours and hours about this. But to be honest, if anyone's interested, just we have a Discord channel up here. There's 1,200 people on it at the moment. But just have a play. Reach out if you've got any questions. There is like a design studio thing.
I was going to ask about that. I know because the title of this one was "What's New in EventCatalog," and I did spot that there was a new studio. So what is that?
Yeah, the idea behind studio really is like the hypothesis anyway is. If we're designing architecture like with Visio or any of these tools, like why can't we use our primitives to design ideas with? We always go back to architecture diagram tools, and it's always like starting from scratch with boxes and lines and things. So the whole idea really is like, well, if you have an event catalog, why can't I just like take all my resources and actually import them into a designer and actually design new ideas and concepts and patterns and God knows what else, and actually export them back into event catalog. So there is a lot of work to be done here. There is just, that's the theory at the moment, but there's more work to be done. But the idea is like here. So what I'm going to do is copy all my resources, open Event Catalog Studio, and then it's going to take me over to this website. I'm going to create a new design, and this is like my palette. What I'm going to do is I am going to import my resources, right? So here they are. And everything down here now is all my EventBridge events, my Lambda handlers, my whatever else. And I'm saying, cool. So I'm going to start using some of these things to actually document and design some new ideas and concepts, right? So I can say this service here is now going to publish these kind of messages. This command here, I think, should then go into the service, but we're going to create a new service, right? We're going to actually kind of edit this, and let's just create this migration service to V2, whatever it is, like that. And then the idea really is just to come out with these concepts and these ideas can you use the visualizer in Event Catalog to actually come up with some new concepts? What do you think to this? And we can attach this kind of this chat node there and everything else, create notes like sticky notes and things like this. So the whole idea really in theory here is using your primitives and your architecture and your documentation, not just as documentation, but can you use it as a tool to design concepts. And the idea here is we can export these out and we can save these as files, Event Catalog files that we can then load back into Event Catalog. So it just gives you more value from that architecture, really. So the future of this tool really depends, but the way I'm thinking about it at the moment is to move it to a local tool where you can host and run this on your machine locally. And as you edit the files on here, it'll actually edit your catalog too. So making it more of like a WYSIWYG for Event Catalog for people that don't want to edit Markdown files. So, if you've got any ideas on that, or anyone, just feel free to reach out. Or you can have a play too. You can come here back to dashboard, and you can see there are some like templates down here, customer onboarding journey, CQRS patterns. Here's a CQRS pattern where it's like, okay, here's this actor doing these events, they're handled by this, published into this. But I've also added some documentation, right? So the way this works is you click on this docs thing, and then I can put in these nodes in context. So I'll give you an example. I use the @ command, and then I press something, and it takes me to the node. So you can basically write documentation using the nodes as context and references. So hopefully that makes sense.
Cool. Well, I can even see that being useful for even event storming or this kind of thing, when you're partly going stuff and you want to extend something and you want to understand something, to have a visual flow diagram rather than having to write everything out from scratch. Could be cool.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and flows is another thing. It's just like, from A to Z. How does event architectures will tell you part of the story, but like from A to Z, from like when a user signs up to checks out and goes and does something at Christmas dinner, what's happening in between all that flow. You can capture some of this stuff. So
excellent.
Yeah, the idea.
1 minute left. You're obviously using AI coding when you're building this as well. Any successes or tips and tricks or things that have worked for you? That's a long question for a minute.
1 minute. Yes, I'm using it. Yes, it's great. It's awesome. To be honest, I use it a lot for like smaller things. I'm doing a massive refactor at the moment on channel-to-channel communication stuff, which is like super complicated, even for me. And I tried to use AI, and it's just not good. So I've gone back to old-fashioned TDD, me writing it and spending about a week on it. But it's great because I actually get what I want. So it's good. It's great. Use it. Use it with safety goals for sure.
I like it. Well, Dave, thanks. That's awesome. It's interesting to see and lovely to see how Event Catalog has progressed over the years. We spoke, a few years ago, and just to see the visualizations and everything that's come around. So I know you're doing this in open source. You're running your business in open source and being very candid and sharing about all the success and challenges about actually building an open source business. So I encourage people to, follow Dave, find out about this, because this is, interesting from an event driven architecture point of view, but also, sustainable open source businesses and things like that. So yeah, eventcatalog.dev is on the screen. Unfortunately, I know I'm not going to see you in reInvent, Dave, but if anyone wants to come and talk event driven architectures to me, I can point you in Dave's direction if you haven't realized already. But yeah, thanks so much for being on Serverless Office Hours, and appreciate the time.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Julian. Always great to be here. So yeah, appreciate that.
Excellent. Thanks for all the hard work. And yeah, next time, same place next week, we're actually going to be doing pre-event where we're going to be talking about reInvent coming up, and a bit of a peek back on some of the cool announcements that would have come out already in the next week. And then looking to reInvent. So if you are going to be in reInvent, I'll be there all week. It'll be fantastic to connect up, come and say hi, or I'm sure there'll be plenty to watch virtually as you see all of the videos and everything coming online. Bye-bye, everybody. See you next week, and thanks again.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.